We're talking today with Harold Soper of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in 1920, April 16, in Indianapolis, Indiana. I lived there 3 years, and then we moved to Berrien Springs, Michigan. Lived there for about 6 years, and then we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I lived all my life
Okay.
until I went into college and went on my own.
All right. Now, what was your family doing for a living when you were growing up?
My dad worked for Kraft Cheese. He was a district manager for Kraft Foods, and he had all of western Michigan and northern Indiana, and his job was to go around to make sure all the salesmen who were selling the products were doing their jobs.
Okay.
So he was a manager over them.
All right. Now, was that a steady job for him in the 30s?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a depression going on, but it's not maybe hitting you as directly as some
Didn't hit
people?
us at all.
Okay. All right. And then, where did you go to high school?
I went to a high school in Grand Rapids named Creston High School.
That's still there, yeah, okay. And when did you graduate from high school?
1938.
All right. And after you got out of high school, where did you go?
I went to Michigan State for 4 years.
Okay. And were you still in college when Pearl Harbor happened?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember how you heard about that?
Oh, yes. I remember I belonged to a fraternity, and we were just kind of partying, doing some partying.
Partying, yeah.
At that time of the day when we heard about it. Oh, that was awfully exciting and awful disturbing, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was terrible because we were graduating and we knew that would affect us.
All right. Now, what did you do about that? Did you go off and enlist, or did you wait to get drafted?
No, I waited to graduate, and I was drafted before I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
I had to graduate after I was drafted.
All right. And then they allowed you to stay in school to finish the term, or? Okay.
The draft board had to get another enlistment man,
Mm-hmm.
and I was it.
Right. Okay. Now, once you've been drafted then, so now it's the middle of 42 at this point, so I think it's July. Where do they send you then for training?
Fort Belvoir for basic training, 3 months of basic training.
Okay. And what did that consist of?
Oh, that consisted of going on marches, learning about our various weapons that we used, quite a few classes, but a lot of training to build us up and strengthen us. We did marches and calisthenics and all that type of thing
Okay.
to get ourselves into shape.
All right. Now let's see. Is that in Virginia?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, were all of you there just for general training, or were you all going to go into the same part of the Army?
We just for general training.
Okay.
People went various places after that.
All right. Now, when you were at Michigan State, had you done any ROTC there?
No.
Okay. So
I had no interest in it.
okay. And that wasn't a requirement at the time you went there? Okay. All right. So now you spent sort of 3 months in Virginia, and at Fort Belvoir, did you have to stay on the base the whole time?
On weekends we could take off.
And do you remember if you went anywhere? Like to Washington or Richmond or?
Yeah, I went to Richmond, and I actually found a young gal there and went to see her every weekend I could.
Hmm?
Got so attracted to her that after I was on furlough, I invited her up to Grand Rapids to meet my family, and I think she was very disappointed, but then I went off to the wars, and we corresponded for a period of time, but
Mm-hmm.
I finally cut it off.
Okay. But in the meantime, you had a pretty good time while in basic training.
Yep.
At least better than most. Okay. Now, once you finished the training, then what did they do with you? Is this where they sent you to Texas, or?
Well, then we were assigned like this Air Force administrative group to go. Well, we were put on a troop ship, and the troop ship, because of the German U-boats, we had to go way around South Africa, South Africa, right down into the coal area down there, and up to Bombay. And I got off at Bombay, and 4 of us were supposed to go to this Air Corps administrative thing I talked about. But when we got there, we found out that the class had already started, so then he assigned us to another group. He assigned us to a group out of Wyoming. The head of the group was a very nice guy from Wyoming, and all the troops were sheep herders. And I came in as a private,
Let's wait for that to finish ringing here.
See, that isn't for us.
Right.
We get those all the time.
Yeah, oh yeah. Okay. Well, let's.
So I went into the Army as a private,
Right.
and just by the grace of God, I got into this particular company, and these guys were a bunch of, they'd never been to college, or a bunch of sheep herders.
Right.
They were prone to drink a lot, and so the guy was a corporal. He goofed off, and so I got his position. And over a period of about 3 months, I got all the way up to master sergeant. Now there was one guy who was a tech sergeant, which is a master sergeant salary grade 6. There was a guy there as a tech sergeant with 5. He'd rather have that position, which had different duties than the master. So I got all the way to a master sergeant in a short period of time.
Okay. Now, to get to the Indian Ocean, you talked about going around Africa and so forth. Do you remember anything about that sea voyage?
Twice our boat had to take a sudden jerk to avoid a German U-boat.
Right.
That was the only exciting thing.
Okay. Now, were you in a convoy or just by yourself?
Oh, the troop ship was a large. It had been a pleasure boat.
Okay, so an ocean liner.
Yeah, and I think we had 10,000 troops, I think, on it. It was a nice big boat.
Okay, and some of those were fast enough that they went without escorts.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had when we went around Rio de Janeiro and that area, we had air cover.
Yeah, because that's available from there, and that was part of it. But were there parts of the ocean where you were just out there by yourself?
That's right.
Okay. Was the weather bad, or was it okay?
No, I remember the weather was nice.
All right. And then, do you remember anything about Bombay? You stayed there a while.
Yeah. What happened was, the 4 of us got there, and the place that we were supposed to go, they had already started, so they put us on, told us to just stay there. So we were there 7 days.
Okay.
So for 7 days, we just wandered around the town of Bombay. We were GIs, and the people there were all good to us, and it was a nice experience. And then we got on a small boat. It took us up the Tigris-Euphrates River to Khorramshahr, Iran.
Right.
And right across the river was Basra, Iraq. Right across the river from each other. And so we were stationed there for a period of time.
Okay. So what kind of setup did you have in Iran? Just live in tents, or in a town, or?
Yeah, we were in tents, and we were in tents, so we got there, but they had barracks made by the time we left.
Mm-hmm.
They did a lot of construction work there while we were there, making it a little nicer for the troops that came after us. But while we were there, we went into town. I went all the way up to Tehran. Took a truck.
Mm-hmm.
A truck of us went up to Tehran, and another Hamadan was another city in Iran that troops went up to. That was a nice town and good to us. And then also we went across to Basra, and I went up into Iraq. I can't remember the names of the cities, but
Mm-hmm.
up 100, 200 miles up into Iraq. So we really got to see that country while we were there.
Okay. What kind of impression did you have of the people in these places?
Well, the Iranian government was really bad. They killed off people like nothing. They were like the Russians. If anyone stole or something, why they just killed them.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Russians did, they buried them alive if they caught someone stealing. They're both the Russians and the Iranians were cruel to their people. But Iraq, their government was a little more humane.
Now, did you have a sense that the people resented your being there, or were happy to have you there, or didn't care?
Well, see, like I said, I was in charge of this, what they call the oil dump.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sending all these things up to Russia, and I had 40 foremen,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
all college-educated Muslims, and they just loved me
Okay.
because I didn't smoke or drink, and they were so glad to know that Americans weren't these tough guys that these construction workers were
Mm-hmm.
getting drunk all the time and smoking and all. Yeah, and I told them those guys, they're not typical Americans at all. And I found out that, I was a Christian, and again, I didn't smoke or drink and all, and they just loved me. I treated them good, and then they oversee the 800 workers that loaded these trucks.
Okay. Now, had they been educated in Iran, or had any of them gone abroad?
I think I can't tell you. They're all college educated. I don't know.
But they spoke English?
Oh, very well.
Yeah. Okay. Now, my understanding is that what was going on in Iran in part was that the British and the Soviets sort of taken over the main railway that went from the Persian Gulf up north.
Yeah.
And so that was, and so it's a supply route that you're using.
The railroad was one of the suppliers.
Okay. And the British were in charge of the half from Tehran south. Did you ever see any British military personnel?
Oh, yes. When I went into town,
Mm-hmm.
so I never cozied up to them because usually they were drinking, and kind of that's where I'd see them, in these restaurants and places, and they were kind of rowdy.
Okay. So you didn't have any official dealings with them or anything else like that? Okay. Now, when you're over in Iran, did you have much communication with people back home?
Yeah. What did we have? We had something like an email.
They have email, right?
Email.
Write it and they take a picture of it or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was pretty faithful in keeping contact with my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you feel like you were kind of missing out on the war over there, or was it interesting enough that it didn't matter?
Well, I'll tell you, my dad was in World War I, and he was a captain.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right in the fight. In fact, he actually was out in no man's land and caught a German soldier and brought him back. And he was quite disappointed that I didn't become an officer.
Mm-hmm.
and second that where I went,
Right.
you know, his first reaction was that he wished it were otherwise, but then after that, he accepted it.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any feeling about that yourself, or you were just going to go where they sent you?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, eventually you rotate home. You don't stay in Iran for the entire war. How did that come about?
Yeah, you have to be over there. I didn't know that at the time. About 18 months before you go back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 18 months, I came to the headquarters there and said I want to go to the quartermaster officers training. And that's when they told me, well, the quartermaster is already in session. They've in 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll be but besides, you're not qualified because you're not a limited service guy, which is one of the requirements that I am. So that's when I said I'd go with the Corps of Engineers. So I signed up with them and went into their basic training.
Okay.
And it's a 13-month thing to become an officer. I was there 10 weeks of that, had that terribly hard training. And then like I told you, the officer in charge there said, you know, because you're doing so well in the written exams
Mm-hmm.
and all, you're gonna pass. But 40% of these guys are gonna fail because we're only taking 60% of them.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys, you know, they've built Bailey bridges and they've been enlisted men. It's just a shame because you can be an officer, but you'll never be able to do a good job of commanding them when you don't understand the work. And I agreed with that wholeheartedly. And so I agreed to quit after 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, he just told me to go to wherever the quartermaster of CS was. Anyway, I was sent there, and when I got there, like I say, they were already in operation. And so I went back to the Corps of Engineers and said, place me someplace. And so I was very fortunate. You know, I had a college education in accounting, and so they sent me to Chicago, where they had military contracts at getting near the end of the war, and many of the military contracts were being closed. So that was my job to
Mm-hmm.
close military contracts from an office standpoint. And so I lived in Chicago for 1 year on what they call rations and quarters.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in a hotel and had my food paid for,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a certain amount of money to spend.
Mm-hmm.
And after 1 year there, they transferred me to Minneapolis, and I did the same thing up there.
Okay. Now, where were you when the war ended? Were you in Chicago at that point, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so then I went up there, and you know, it was just wonderful the work I did. I was trained with in school, and I could
Mm-hmm.
do, and not very many people could do that, and I lived high on the hog.
Right. Now, when you were doing this kind of work, did problems come up? Were there any companies you were dealing with that were?
Oh yeah,
Up to
and
date?
in fact, many times I had to visit these companies.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Oh, I don't think I ever got one contract closed that I didn't have to have at least one visit. That I had a company car, and in fact, a lot of times I had a company driver who would take me to these places, depending on if it was close by at all, then I could drive a company car, but if they thought it was out of the way or dangerous, so I'd get a driver.
Okay, so company car, I mean like an army car, basically, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, you were still a master sergeant at this point,
Mm-hmm.
and then did you go in a formal dress uniform and try to look impressive? Or?
No, I was always in the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Always. And actually, in the Army, most people have more respect for a master sergeant than certainly a second lieutenant.
Oh, yeah.
And probably even a first lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when I was in Iran there, I had a first lieutenant who was there as my boss,
Mm-hmm.
and he just sat around.
Well, the sergeants do the work. I mean,
I did all the work he didn't. But he was there. He'd been in the war, and he actually had been wounded,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd been in the hospital, and he was there just for recovery.
Now, the unit that was in Iran, you said they were from Wyoming. Would that have been a reserve unit or a National Guard unit?
It was a reserve.
Okay. So you had your core group of guys who were in it, and
You know.
that's where they got sent. Okay. Now, in that unit, were you pretty much the only guy from someplace else? Or?
Yeah. But no, there were four of us.
Okay.
There were
Yeah, the four of you came together.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
other three guys, they never advanced at all.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't care to.
So they just joined the rest of the group, and
Yeah, they just joined it, and they didn't care whether they got to be an officer or even a enlisted officer or not. But they were nice guys, but they were certainly nothing like me.
right. Now, a lot of times soldiers, if they're stationed in a rear area in some other country, can get into a lot of interesting kinds of trouble. There could be women, there could be black markets or other things like that. Did much of that happen, or in Iran was the society more tightly controlled than that?
Yeah. There were women, and some of these guys would get involved with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wasn't aware of much of it. I
Right.
didn't do it myself, and I just heard what they did, but I'm not too knowledgeable about that.
Right. And I wouldn't think that you'd necessarily have a lot of bars in places like that.
They had the bars.
They had bars, okay. I guess they wouldn't after the Islamic State took over, but that was a long time afterward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So when you were kind of talking about doing, again, this business of closing contracts and things like that, what kinds of businesses were you dealing with? Were they manufacturers or?
Well, yeah, they were. Well, one of them was a weapons manufacturer. A number of them supplied things like clothing,
Mm-hmm.
uniforms, and yeah, I remember several of them were in the uniform, and let's see, what other things were they supplying that the military need that weren't necessarily military items, but I don't remember any food
Mm-hmm.
companies. That's about
Okay,
it. I
all right.
don't remember.
But yeah, I mean, but you have just all the stuff that you need to run the offices with, and all the various kinds of equipment besides the weapons and so forth. Anyway, okay, but basically you were pretty much responsible for a wide range of different things in the companies that were just in those areas.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, did the Army did the Army make any effort to get you to stay on, or did they just want everyone to go away?
They did ask me if officer
Right.
and stay. I had that, at the end, they gave me that opportunity,
Mhm.
but I turned it down.
Okay. Now, so when did you get out of the Army?
I got out in 46.
Okay. And after you got out, what did you do?
I went back to University of Michigan and got my master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that my tuition and everything was paid for by some organization that heard about what I did and all. And I can't remember what the organization was, but it was some organization in Chicago that paid for all of that for me.
Okay. I mean, somebody that you had somehow done business with or had a connection with from that
No,
time?
I didn't have any connection with it.
Okay.
They just made that available, and somebody in the military there made that available to me, and I
Okay.
contacted them.
So you got into that
So, I
program.
mean, they were just doing for anybody that they felt had done a good job in the military.
Okay. Now, was this in accounting or something else that you did? The master's degree?
Business administration.
Okay. And then once you finished that, did you go find a job?
Oh, yeah. First, I wasn't sure what company I wanted to go with, and so I became a CPA, certified public accountant, and I went around and audited books of a lot of people. I did that for a couple of years, and then I went to Ford Motor Company. I was there 26 years.
Mhm.
I started out as an auditor, in internal auditing, and I worked up to the controller of the company.
Okay. And did you retire out of there or move on to something else?
No, I retired from there. I retired from there, but what I did, no, I didn't. I retired from there, but then I went back into CPA work.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was just the Lord's leading, because one of the big clients I had was in Muskegon, and the job there took about 2 months in the middle of winter, and that's when I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
One of the gals who worked at the client was a friend of my wife, and she fixed us up on a blind date, and that was the beginning.
All right.
That was wonderful.
Okay. When you kind of look back at the time that you spent in the service, what do you think you took out of that or learned from it?
Well, certainly, I grew up, I guess, and became an adult, and knew what was going on in the world. And I was a little bit unhappy with the way I lived a more controlled life, and in the church and the church community and all. I just didn't know about some of the people out there who live so vulgarly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think the main thing I say is that I grew up and knew what was generally going on in the world, and I was then happy to come back into the climate of a church and a Christian school and all that type of thing. It made me appreciate it more.
All right. Okay. Well, you were telling me, you don't remember as much as you used to, but I can say that you told us enough to make this worth coming in and recording the interview, and I can safely say that I've never talked to anybody who had either of your jobs. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, it's my privilege of doing it. Thank you.